The first time Brandon called me Pops in front of the entire break room, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not physically, though at 67 with arthritis creeping through my joints, physical pain was a constant companion. No, this was different. This was the sound of 50 years of professional pride splintering under the weight of a dismissive nickname from a manager less than half my age. "Hey Pops, think you can manage to not screw up the seasonal display today? Some of us are trying to keep this store profitable." The room went quiet. 20 pairs of eyes suddenly found their smartphones fascinating. No one looked at me, the old-timer, the senior greeter, the guy who used to own his own construction company before the 2008 recession and a series of medical catastrophes decimated everything my wife Elaine and I had built. "I'll do my best, Brandon," I replied, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning through me. Elaine always said I had a poker face that could win championships. At that moment, I was grateful for it. Only Marta, the 65-year-old woman who worked customer service, caught my eye with a look of silent solidarity. She understood. 6 months ago, she'd been an office manager at an accounting firm. Now she spent her days being berated by customers over $2 price discrepancies and return policies she didn't create. Brandon smirked, running a hand through his meticulously styled hair. "That's what you said yesterday, but I had to send Amber to fix everything." He gestured to a 19-year-old cashier who suddenly seemed intensely interested in her chipped nail polish. "Just try to keep up, all right? This isn't a retirement home." Laughter rippled around the room. Nervous, uncomfortable, but laughter nonetheless. No one wanted to be Brandon's next target. I nodded, swallowed the bitter pill of degradation, and finished my coffee in silence. 5 minutes later, I was arranging Halloween decorations with hands that had once built custom homes and crafted furniture people paid thousands for. Hands that now earned $8.25 an hour because Elaine's medication cost $1,140 a month after insurance. That night, driving home in our 15-year-old Toyota with 187,000 miles on it, I finally let the mask slip. I pulled over on a side street and screamed until my throat burned. I pounded the steering wheel until my palms stung. Then I wiped my eyes, composed myself, and drove the remaining 3 miles home. Elaine couldn't see me like this. She carried enough guilt about her illness already. "How was work today?" she asked when I walked in, looking up from her knitting. Despite the ravages of rheumatoid arthritis, she still managed to create beautiful things. A small pile of baby hats sat beside her, donations for the hospital's NICU. Always thinking of others, my Elaine. "Same as usual," I lied, bending to kiss her forehead. "Nothing exciting." She studied my face with eyes that had seen through my bullshit for 43 years of marriage. "Robert Mitchell Davidson, don't you dare lie to me." I sighed and sank into my recliner, a garage sale find that had replaced the leather stickly chair we'd had to sell. "Just the usual nonsense. Young manager with something to prove." Her eyes softened. "Brandon again?" "It's nothing, Elaine. Really. It's not nothing when it puts that look in your eyes." She set her knitting aside. "You don't have to do this, you know. We could sell the house, move into that senior apartment complex." "Absolutely not," I cut her off. "This house is all we have left. And it's where we raise the kids. Where we'll host Thanksgiving next month. I'm not giving that up just because some punk makes my job unpleasant. What I didn't say was that I'd already done the math. Even if we sold the house, paid off the second mortgage we'd taken out for Elaine's medical bills, and downsized drastically, we'd still need supplemental income. And at my age, with my outdated skills, the retail job was as good as it was going to get. "I just hate seeing what this is doing to you," she said softly. "Let's talk about something else," I suggested, forcing brightness into my voice. "Did you speak with Jenny today? How's my granddaughter doing in her dance class?" Elaine allowed the subject change, but I caught the worry lingering in her eyes. The same worry I saw every morning in the mirror as I donned the red vest that had become both my uniform and my shame. The next morning I arrived at Super Save 15 minutes early as always. Despite the humiliation, despite the ache in my knees that never quite went away, I remained pathologically punctual. Some habits die hard. Marta was already at the time clock, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her uniform pressed despite being the same one she'd worn all week. Like me, she carried her dignity in the details they couldn't take from her. "Morning, Robert." She greeted me with a tired smile. "Ready for another thrilling day in retail paradise?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, punching in. "You closing tonight?" She nodded. Brandon asked me to stay late again. Apparently Kylie has concert tickets, so her shift needed covering. The quotes around "asked" said everything. Neither of us had the luxury of refusing. Not with bills to pay and few alternatives. "I'll stay with you," I offered. "Elaine has her book club tonight anyway." Marta squeezed my arm gratefully. "Thanks, I hate waiting for the bus alone after dark." We parted ways, Marta to customer service, me to my post by the front entrance. For the next 8 hours, I would greet customers, direct them to departments they could clearly see from the entrance, and endure the particular indignity of being either completely ignored or treated with the exaggerated patience reserved for the senile. By midday, my forced smile felt etched into my face. I'd been mistaken for a customer 3 times by staff who'd worked alongside me for months. I'd been asked if I needed help finding the pharmacy twice by shoppers who assumed I was lost. And I'd been reprimanded by Brandon for looking tired and bringing down the store's energy. "This is a vibrant shopping environment, Robert," he'd lectured, his voice dripping with condescension. "Customers don't want to be greeted by someone who looks like they're at a funeral." I'd nodded, straightened my posture despite the protest from my lower back, and widened my smile until my cheeks ached. The military discipline of my youth, 3 years in Vietnam that I rarely spoke about, served me well in moments like these. I could compartmentalize. I could endure. The real trouble started during my lunch break. I was eating my peanut butter sandwich in the break room, another small economy bringing lunch instead of buying it, when Amber and 2 other cashiers came in laughing about something on Amber's phone. "Oh my God, he actually did it," one of them squealed. "He made a TikTok." They huddled around the screen, giggling uncontrollably. I paid little attention until I heard my name. Poor old Robert almost had a heart attack. My head snapped up. "Excuse me?" The girls looked over, suddenly awkward. Amber tucked her phone away quickly. "Nothing," she mumbled. "You said my name," I persisted. "What about me almost having a heart attack?" The oldest of the 3, a girl named Jessie who had always been moderately respectful to me, at least had the decency to look embarrassed. "It's just a stupid prank video Brandon made," she explained reluctantly. He scared you yesterday when you were arranging the Halloween display. Remember when he jumped out with that mask?" I remembered. I'd been on a stepladder, reaching to place a decorative witch on a high shelf, when Brandon had appeared suddenly in a grotesque zombie mask, shouting directly behind me. I'd jerked in surprise, lost my balance, and nearly fallen. Only a quick grab at the shelving had saved me from what could have been a serious injury at my age. Brandon had laughed it off as just a little Halloween fun. I'd said nothing, my heart racing dangerously, my dignity once again in tatters. "He filmed that?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Jessie nodded uncomfortably. "He's been doing these prank videos with different employees. He has a whole channel." "May I see it, please?" The girls exchanged glances. Finally, Amber reluctantly pulled out her phone again and handed it to me. The video was mercifully short but excruciating to watch. Brandon, filming selfie style, narrating his plan to give the old-timer a Halloween surprise. Then the camera, angle shifting to capture my startled reaction, my arms pinwheeling as I fought for balance. The worst part was the caption, "Almost sent Grandpa to the hospital. Retail pranks or old people belike. Heart attack check." It had over 20,000 views already. I handed the phone back wordlessly, stood up, and walked out of the break room. My sandwich remained half-eaten on the table, in the employee bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and did something I hadn't done since my mother's funeral 12 years ago. I wept. Silent, shuddering sobs that racked my body with the full force of accumulated humiliations. I wept for the business I'd lost, for the man I used to be, for the daily indignities I endured to keep Elaine in medication. I wept because I was trapped, too young to die but too old to start over. When I emerged 15 minutes later, my eyes were red but dry. I splashed water on my face, straightened my vest, and returned to my post with military precision. 3 hours left in my shift. I could endure anything for 3 hours. But as I took my position by the entrance, I saw Brandon standing with the store manager, Sandra Davis. They were both looking at me, Brandon with a smug smile, Sandra with concern. "Robert," she called, beckoning me over. "Could we speak with you in my office?" My stoic face betrayed nothing, as I followed them to the small room at the back of the store. Inside, Sandra gestured for me to sit while she took her place behind the desk. Brandon remained standing, arms crossed, that infuriating smirk still playing at his lips. "Robert," Sandra began carefully, "Brandon has brought some concerns to my attention about your performance." I said nothing, waiting. "He says you've been hostile toward him and other employees, that you're resistant to feedback, and that customers have complained about your demeanor." Every word was a knife twist, every fabrication another indignity piled upon the mountain I already carried. "Is that so?" I finally replied, my voice even. "Robert, I understand that this job can be challenging, especially for someone who's been in the workforce as long as you have, but we have certain standards and expectations." "I'd like to see the customer complaints," I interrupted. Sandra blinked. "Pardon?" "The complaints. I'd like to see them. It's company policy that all customer complaints are documented. I'd like to review them." Brandon shifted uncomfortably. We all knew there were no complaints. This was his retaliation for my reaction to his prank. "Well, they weren't formal complaints," he interjected quickly. "More like comments to me in passing?" "I see." I turned my attention back to Sandra. "And the hostility? Can you give me specific examples?" Sandra looked to Brandon, clearly realizing she'd been pulled into something she didn't fully understand. "Brandon said you were dismissive of his instructions regarding the seasonal display, and that you've been giving him attitude when he provides coaching." I nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. And is posting videos of employees without their consent, videos that could have resulted in workplace injury, considered appropriate coaching in this company?" Sandra's brow furrowed. "Videos? What videos?" Brandon's smirk vanished. "It's just some team-building stuff for social media. Everyone's in on it." "I wasn't in on being filmed while you deliberately startled me on a stepladder," I replied calmly. "Nor was I in on having that video posted online with captions mocking my age. I believe that violates several company policies regarding dignity in the workplace and social media conduct." Sandra's expression hardened as she turned to Brandon. "Is this true?" Brandon's confidence was evaporating rapidly. It was just a joke. Everyone thought it was funny. "I'd like to file a formal complaint," I said, my voice still remarkably steady, "for age discrimination, harassment, and creating an unsafe work environment. I'd also like to request that the video be removed immediately." The next 20 minutes were a blur of corporate damage control. Sandra, suddenly terrified of potential lawsuits and PR disasters, apologized profusely. Brandon was instructed to delete the video immediately and was scheduled for sensitivity training. I was offered the rest of the day off with pay, which I declined. "I'll finish my shift," I stated simply. I've never left a job half done. As I walked out of the office, Brandon caught up to me in the hallway. "That was a real dick move," he hissed. "It was just a joke. No one else has a problem with my videos." I turned to face him fully, looking directly into his eyes for perhaps the first time since he'd become my supervisor. "Brandon, I was calculating load-bearing requirements for two-story structures when you were still learning to tie your shoes. I built a business from nothing, employed 30 people, and lost everything trying to save my wife's life. I'm here because I have to be, not because I have something to prove. The next time you feel the need to bolster your ego at my expense, Remember that I've survived things that would break you in half." His eyes widened slightly, his bravado faltering in the face of this unexpected steel. "Whatever, old man," he muttered, but the words lacked conviction. I returned to my position by the door, greeting customers with the same practiced smile. But something had shifted inside me. A small reclamation of power, a tiny piece of dignity retrieved from the wreckage. That evening I drove Marta home as promised. The late shift had been quiet, with Brandon conspicuously avoiding both of us. Word had spread quickly about the incident, creating an awkward bubble of overly polite interactions from staff who had previously ignored me. "You stood up to him," Marta said as we drove through the darkened streets. "I wish I'd been there to see it." "It wasn't as dramatic as people are making it out to be," I demurred. "Still, it's about time someone called him out on his behavior. He's been tormenting the older employees for months." I glanced at her. "Has he targeted you too?" Marta sighed, looking out the window at the passing streetlights. "Not with pranks. But he schedules me for the worst shifts, makes comments about my outdated customer service approach, and once suggested I might be more comfortable working fewer hours. As if I'm here for fun." The familiar anger stirred again. "You should report him." "For what?" "Being subtly ageist in ways that are hard to prove. Besides," she added with a bitter smile, "I need this job even more than you do. At least you have a house. I'm renting a one-bedroom apartment that takes half my monthly income." We drove in silence for a few blocks, the unfairness of our shared predicament hanging between us. "Do you ever wonder how we ended up here?" I asked finally. "After all we've accomplished, all we've survived, how did we become disposable?" Marta considered this. "I think we were always disposable to them. We just had enough leverage before that they had to pretend we weren't." When we reached her apartment building, a drab utilitarian structure that had seen better days, she surprised me by inviting me in for coffee. "Elaine won't mind?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Book club," I reminded her. "They'll be discussing wine and romance novels until at least 10. Marta's apartment was small, but immaculately kept. Photos of her grandchildren adorned the walls, alongside degrees and professional certifications that now gathered dust. She made coffee in a tiny kitchen, while I admired a particularly professional-looking portrait of a young woman who shared Marta's eyes. "My daughter, Carmen," she explained, returning with 2 mugs. "She's a pediatrician in Chicago. Keeps trying to convince me to move there, but I can't afford the cost of living even with her help. She looks like you," I observed. Same determined expression. Marta smiled proudly. "She got that from watching me raise her alone after her father left. I worked 3 jobs sometimes, but she never heard me complain." We settled into comfortable chairs, sipping coffee and trading stories of our previous lives. I told her about the construction company I'd built from a single truck and a toolbox, how I'd specialized in historic renovations that required craftsmanship few could provide. She shared how she'd worked her way up from receptionist to office manager, running an accounting firm so efficiently that the partners barely needed to involve themselves in day-to-day operations. "They replaced me with the managing partner's nephew," she revealed. 26 years old with an MBA and no actual experience. Last I heard, they're struggling to keep clients. The construction company that bought my contracts after the bankruptcy hired my foreman," I countered, "then fired him 6 months later for inefficiency and replaced him with someone younger who cut every corner possible. They're being sued now for substandard work." We laughed, the hollow laugh of the vindicated who would nevertheless trade validation for financial security in a heartbeat. As the evening wore on, our conversation deepened. We shared fears about the future, about health issues we couldn't afford to address, about the terror of outliving our meager savings. For the first time in years, I spoke openly about the shame I carried for failing to provide for Elaine in our golden years, for needing to work a menial job that barely covered our necessities. "You didn't fail," Marta insisted, her hand covering mine in a gesture of solidarity. "The system failed. You played by all the rules, worked hard, saved, built something meaningful, and then forces entirely beyond your control took it all away. That's not failure. That's injustice." Her words lodged in my chest, a truth I'd been unable to articulate myself. When I finally left her apartment, something had shifted between us. Not romance. We were both too worn down by life for that, but something equally precious. Understanding, recognition, the relief of being truly seen. The next few weeks brought subtle changes to SuperSave. Brandon, chastened by his brush with corporate consequences, adopted a strained professionalism toward me. The younger employees regarded me with a new curiosity, as if my confrontation had transformed me from invisible elder to person of interest. Marta and I developed a quiet alliance, covering for each other's physical limitations, sharing rides to save on transportation costs, bringing extra food when we knew the other was stretching their budget thin. But the most significant change was internal. I began to see my situation differently. Yes, I was still an aging man doing menial work for inadequate pay, but I was also a reservoir of experience that had value, even if the current market undervalued it. I began to carry myself with the authority I'd once possessed naturally, speaking with the confident precision of someone who had managed dozens of employees and million-dollar projects. And people noticed. Customers began asking specifically for my help with home improvement questions. Younger employees sought my advice on everything from relationship problems to car maintenance. Even Sandra, the store manager, occasionally consulted me on logistics issues that her business degree hadn't prepared her for. It wasn't enough to change my financial reality, but it was a balm for my wounded pride, a reclamation of identity beyond senior greeter. Then came the day that changed everything. I was helping an elderly customer find the right light bulbs for her antique lamps when a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit approached me. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Robert Davidson?" I straightened, instantly alert. No one called me by my full name here. "Yes, I am." He extended his hand. "William Thorndike. You probably don't remember me, but you renovated my Victorian on Elmwood Avenue about 15 years ago." Recognition dawned. It had been one of my most challenging and rewarding projects, a complete restoration of a Queen Anne Victorian that had suffered decades of neglect and inappropriate modernization. "Of course," I replied, shaking his hand. "The pocket doors were a particular challenge, as I recall." His face lit up. "Yes, you had to custom mill the replacements because the originals had been removed. The detail work was extraordinary. For a moment, I was transported back to my previous life, discussing walnut grain patterns and historical accuracy with clients who appreciated craftsmanship. "What brings you to SuperSave, Mr. Thorndike?" I asked, conscious of my red vest and name tag. "Actually, I've been trying to locate you for months," he admitted. "I sold the Victorian last year and moved to a craftsman bungalow that needs significant restoration. None of the contractors I've interviewed understand the period details or have the skills to replicate them." Hope fluttered dangerously in my chest. "I'm flattered, but I'm no longer in business." "So I gathered," he replied, glancing around the store. "But I'm not looking to hire your company. I'm looking to hire you as a consultant to oversee the project, provide expertise, and ensure the work is done correctly. The contractors will handle the physical labor, but you would be the authority on the restoration." My mind raced. Consulting work. Using my knowledge without the physical demands that had become increasingly difficult. A return, however partial, to the work that had defined me. "I would need to consider the terms," I said carefully, tamping down my excitement. "I do have commitments here." Thorndike smiled knowingly. "I'm prepared to make it worth your while. Shall we discuss it over lunch tomorrow? My treat." We arranged to meet at a nearby cafe during my lunch break the following day. As he walked away, I noticed Brandon watching from the end of the aisle, his expression unreadable. That night I told Elaine everything. Her joy was tempered with caution. We'd had our hopes raised and dashed too many times to celebrate prematurely. But as we discussed possibilities, a spark returned to her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "You've missed it," she observed. "The creating, the problem-solving." "I have," I admitted. "More than I realized." "Then regardless of what happens with this opportunity, We need to find a way for you to return to it, even in a small way. Next day, my lunch with William Thorndyke exceeded all expectations. His offer was generous, $75 per hour for 20 hours a week. Initially for 3 months, but likely to extend to a year given the scope of the restoration. He would work around my SuperSave schedule until I felt secure enough to reduce my hours, or leave entirely. I don't want to rush your decision, he said as we finished our meal. But I do hope you'll accept. Your reputation in the restoration community remains sterling despite your current circumstances. I raised an eyebrow. You know about my bankruptcy? He nodded. This is a small city, and quality craftsmanship is rare enough to be remembered. Several of my friends still speak of your work with admiration. They were disappointed when medical bills forced you out of business. The compassionate understanding in his voice nearly undid me. Here was someone who saw beyond the red vest to the craftsman beneath. I would be honored to consult on your project, I told him sincerely. When would you like me to start? How's this weekend? I'd love to show you the property and discuss our vision for the restoration. We shook hands, and I returned to SuperSave with a lightness in my step I hadn't felt in years. For the remainder of my shift, not even Brandon's petty criticisms could diminish my renewed sense of purpose. Marta noticed immediately when we met in the break room. Something's happened, she observed. You look different. I told her about Thorndyke's offer, watching her face transform with genuine happiness for me, despite the knowledge that our daily alliance would eventually end. This is wonderful, Robert. A perfect use of your expertise. It's just consulting, I reminded her, and part-time at that. But it's a start. She squeezed my hand. Sometimes a start is all we need. The following weekend, Elaine insisted on accompanying me to Thorndyke's bungalow. If you're going to be spending significant time there, I want to see it, she declared. Besides, I've missed watching you in your element. The property was even more promising than I'd hoped. A 1910 craftsman with intact original woodwork, period fixtures that needed restoration rather than replacement, and owners who respected the historical integrity of the home. As I walked through the rooms, pointing out significant features and explaining restoration approaches, I felt myself transforming back into the expert I had once been. William and his wife Catherine listened attentively, clearly impressed by Elaine's insightful questions and obvious pride in my knowledge. By the end of the visit, Catherine had offered Elaine a part-time position as well, helping to source period-appropriate textiles and decorative elements. I understand you have an impressive knowledge of handicrafts, Catherine mentioned casually. Your husband mentioned your involvement in his previous restoration projects. Elaine blushed with pleasure. I used to assist with research and interior finishing touches. It's a passion of mine. Then we would be delighted to have your expertise as well, at the same hourly rate, of course. Driving home, Elaine and I were almost giddy with possibility. The combined consulting income wouldn't replace our lost savings or erase our medical debt, but it would allow us to reduce our dependence on SuperSave, to reclaim not just financial breathing room, but professional dignity. We should celebrate, Elaine suggested. Let's invite Marta for dinner tomorrow, I proposed. I want to share this good fortune with her. Maybe William knows someone who could use her organizational skills as well. Elaine smiled knowingly. You care about her. She's become a friend, I said simply. One of the few good things to come from SuperSave. The next day I approached Sandra about reducing my hours. To my surprise, she was supportive. I'm happy for you, Robert, she said sincerely. This sounds like a perfect opportunity for someone with your background. We can certainly accommodate a part-time schedule. Brandon, however, was less enthusiastic when he overheard the news. Consulting? At your age? He scoffed as I was leaving Sandra's office. Good luck with that. I regarded him calmly, no longer affected by his petty jabs. Thank you for the good wishes, Brandon. I appreciate your support. His eyes narrowed at my lack of reaction. You know they're just hiring you out of pity, right? Because they feel sorry for the old guy working retail? For a moment, the familiar shame threatened to resurface. Then I remembered Thorndyke's genuine respect, the reverence with which he'd shown me the original woodwork in his home, the trust he placed in my expertise. No, Brandon, I replied with quiet certainty. They're hiring me because I possess skills and knowledge that took decades to acquire. Skills that are increasingly rare and valuable in a world of mass production and quick fixes. I straightened, my vest out of habit. But I understand why that might be difficult for you to comprehend. His face flushed with anger, but for once he had no ready retort. I walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway, momentarily stripped of the power he'd wielded so carelessly. That evening, Marta joined us for dinner, a simple but carefully prepared meal that felt like a celebration. We shared the good news, watching her face light up with genuine happiness despite her own unchanged circumstances. I've been thinking, I said as we finished our meal. The three of us, we represent decades of professional experience that's being wasted stocking shelves and processing returns. Elaine raised an eyebrow, recognizing my tone. It was the voice I used when developing a new business concept, a voice she hadn't heard in years. What are you suggesting? Marta asked. A consortium of sorts. Seniors with specialized professional knowledge offering consulting services to businesses and individuals. No overhead. We work from home or on site. No employees initially, just a network of experienced professionals marketing their expertise. Like a temp agency for retirees, Elaine suggested. More specialized than that, not just filling positions temporarily but providing expert guidance that younger workers might lack. Institutional knowledge, problem-solving approaches that come from decades of experience. Marta considered this, her analytical mind so wasted at the customer service desk. Clearly engaged, it would need careful positioning, not competing with younger workers but complementing them. Exactly, I agreed. Mentorship with measurable deliverables. By the end of the evening, the seed of a new venture had been planted, not a replacement for our lost careers, but a reimagining of how our experience could still have value in a market that had deemed us obsolete. The following weeks were a whirlwind of change. My consulting hours expanded as word of my involvement spread among Thorndyke's social circle. Elaine's textile and decorative consultations became regular engagements. Marta gave notice at SuperSave after I connected her with an accounting firm that needed temporary help, organizing a chaotic office during tax season, a position that quickly evolved into a part-time office management role. We continued developing our consortium concept in evening meetings that grew to include other displaced professionals we'd encountered, a retired engineer, a former executive secretary, a master gardener with specialized knowledge of historic landscapes. Each brought unique skills that, while no longer valued in traditional employment settings, had potential market value when properly packaged. 3 months after my confrontation with Brandon, I submitted my resignation to SuperSave. My consulting work had expanded to 30 hours weekly across multiple restoration projects, providing income that, while not matching my previous earnings, offered financial stability and professional fulfillment. On my final day, I worked my shift with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The red vest no longer felt like a badge of shame, but simply a uniform I was about to outgrow. At the end of the day, several coworkers presented me with a card they'd all signed, including, notably, Brandon, though his signature was perfunctory at best. "We'll miss you, Robert," Sandra said sincerely during our exit interview. "Your reliability and attention to detail have been valuable assets to our team." "Thank you," I replied, appreciating the professional courtesy. "It's been an educational experience." As I turned in my vest and name tag, Brandon approached awkwardly. "So, I guess this is it," he said, clearly uncomfortable. "It is." He shuffled slightly, then thrust out his hand. "No hard feelings?" I studied him for a moment. This young man who had wielded his small authority like a weapon, who had found amusement in humiliating those he deemed beneath him. In another world, I might have been his mentor, teaching him not just management skills but the wisdom to use them humanely. I shook his hand briefly. "I hope you find success, Brandon, and I hope that when you reach my age, You encounter more kindness than you've shown." His eyes widened slightly at the gentle rebuke. For a moment I thought he might actually be absorbing the lesson. Then his expression hardened again, pride overriding introspection. "Whatever, old man. Enjoy your retirement hobby." I smiled, genuinely amused by his predictable regression. "I will. And Brandon, those TikTok pranks? They're not as original as you think. We were doing similar things in construction crews 50 years ago. We just didn't need internet validation to feel important." Walked out of Super Save for the final time, leaving Brandon speechless behind me. In the parking lot, Elaine waited in our Toyota, which now sported a magnetic sign on the door. "Davidson Restoration Consulting." "How does it feel?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Her hands, despite the arthritis that had gnarled, her fingers were steady on the wheel, another small victory in our ongoing battle for dignity. I considered the question seriously, like reclaiming something I thought was lost forever. She reached over to squeeze my hand. "I'm proud of you, for enduring when you had to, and for finding a way forward when the opportunity came." That evening, Marta joined us again, along with 3 other founding members of what we had decided to call Seasoned Expertise Consortium. Around our dining room table, the same one I'd crafted by hand 30 years earlier, we finalized our business plan, prepared marketing materials, and assigned initial responsibilities. As I looked around at these faces marked by time and experience, I felt a surge of something I'd almost forgotten: anticipation. Not just for personal success, but for collective vindication, for proving that age and wisdom still had value in a world obsessed with youth and innovation. "To second acts," Marta proposed, raising her glass in a toast. "And to remembering our worth," Elaine added. "To dignity," I concluded. "Reclaimed and renewed." 6 months later, our consortium had 27 active members and consulting contracts with 14 businesses across the city. We operated from a small office space donated by Thorndike as part of his emerging role as our most enthusiastic advocate. Each member brought decades of specialized knowledge that had been overlooked in traditional hiring processes, but proved invaluable in targeted consultations. Marta had developed our financial systems, applying the organizational genius that had once kept an accounting firm running smoothly. Elaine managed our communications and client relations, her gracious manner and attention to detail creating genuine connections with our growing client base. I handled project assessments and member recruitment, identifying both needs and the perfect experienced professionals to address them. Our first major triumph came when the city's Historical Preservation Board hired 5 of our members as consultants. For the renovation of the century-old public library, the project director, a capable but inexperienced architect in her 30s, had initially resisted the interference of consultants old enough to be her grandparents. By the project's completion, she was publicly praising the invaluable institutional knowledge that had saved both time and money while preserving historical authenticity. The most personally satisfying moment, however, came on a crisp autumn morning when I arrived at our office to find a familiar face waiting nervously in the reception area. Brandon. He was dressed in business casual rather than his Super Save manager's uniform, and the cocky smirk had been replaced by an expression of uncomfortable humility. "Mr. Davidson," he greeted me formally, standing as I entered. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." I hadn't, of course, agreed to any such meeting. He'd simply shown up, likely counting on the social awkwardness of turning him away in person. "Brandon," I acknowledged neutrally. "What brings you to our office?" He glanced around at the modest but professional space, noting the plaque on the wall displaying our mission statement, connecting decades of experience with today's challenges. I'm not with Super Save anymore," he began awkwardly. "I see. A new opportunity?" He shifted his weight. "Not exactly. There were some disagreements with upper management about my management style. Translation: his behavior had finally caught up with him. I'm sorry to hear that." "I wasn't particularly, but decades of professional courtesy die hard." The thing is, he continued, I've started my own business, a small contracting company focusing on home renovations, but I'm having some challenges with client confidence. Understanding dawned. You're looking for experienced consultants to lend credibility to your new venture. He nodded, relief evident that he wouldn't have to spell it out. Your consortium has an excellent reputation. Having some of your experts available to consult on my projects would be beneficial. The irony wasn't lost on me. The young manager who had belittled my experience and mocked my age was now seeking the very wisdom he had dismissed. Our consultants are quite busy these days, I observed, and we're selective about the companies we partner with. His face fell slightly. I understand, but I was hoping, given our history. Our history? I raised an eyebrow. You mean when you created a hostile work environment, publicly humiliated older employees, and posted videos mocking me online? Brandon had the grace to look genuinely ashamed. I was immature. I didn't understand then what I was doing, how it affected people. And now, he met my eyes directly for the first time. Now I'm 30 years old with a failed management career, trying to start over in a field where I have technical skills but no reputation. I'm watching clients choose other contractors because they don't trust my judgment or experience. He paused. I finally understand what it feels like to be dismissed based on perception rather than ability. I studied him, looking for signs of the manipulative charm he'd often deployed at Super Save. Instead, I saw something I recognized all too well. Desperation mingled with wounded pride. The face of someone whose professional identity had been shattered. Why come to me? I asked. There are other consultants in the city, ones without our complicated history. Because you built something from nothing. Twice, he replied. First your construction company, and now this consortium. I thought. He hesitated. I thought maybe you could teach me how to do that, how to earn trust and build a reputation when the odds are against you. It was perhaps the first genuine compliment he'd ever paid me. An acknowledgement not just of my professional accomplishments, but of the character that had made them possible. Have a seat, I said finally, gesturing to my office. Let's discuss what you're proposing. The conversation that followed was surprisingly productive. Brandon had solid technical skills. He'd worked construction through college before moving into retail management, but lacked the business acumen and client approach that turned skills into sustainable enterprise. He was humble enough now to recognize these gaps and hungry enough to address them. Here's what I can offer, I told him after nearly an hour of discussion. Not a partnership with the consortium. You haven't earned that yet. But I'll personally consult on 3 of your projects, evaluate your work and business practices, and then decide whether to recommend you for limited consulting support. Relief washed over his face. That's more than fair. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I cautioned. My standards are exacting, and my evaluations will be brutally honest. If your work doesn't meet our quality thresholds, or if I see any sign of the disrespect you showed at Super Save, our arrangement ends immediately. He nodded solemnly. I understand, and I appreciate the opportunity to prove myself. As he left, Marta appeared in my doorway, having observed the meeting from a discreet distance. Are you sure about this? She asked skeptically. After everything he put you through? I considered her question carefully. I'm not doing it for him, I said finally. I'm doing it because 30 years ago, when I was starting out, a master craftsman named Harold Sullivan took a chance on me despite my arrogance and inexperience. He taught me not just technical skills, but professional ethics. Without his mentorship, I would never have built the business that supported my family for decades. Paying it forward, Marta observed with a slight smile. With appropriate boundaries, I clarified, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Over the next 3 months, I supervised Brandon's work on renovation projects, small jobs for friends of friends, the kind of work all contractors start with. To my surprise, his technical skills were solid, and his attitude was transformed. Where he had once been dismissive of experience, he now sought it eagerly, absorbing advice and implementing suggestions with genuine dedication. He's trying to impress you, Elaine remarked one evening after I recounted his progress. Maybe, I acknowledged. But he's also building habits that will serve him well regardless of motivation. Craftsmanship has a way of shaping character when approached with the right mindset. By the third project, Brandon had proven himself capable of quality work, delivered with professional courtesy. More importantly, he'd demonstrated a growing awareness of how his previous behavior had impacted others. I saw Marta at the grocery store yesterday, he mentioned during one of our site visits. I apologized for how I treated her at Super Save. How did she respond? She said actions speak louder than words, but that she appreciated the gesture. He shrugged. Fair enough, I've got a lot to make up for. At the completion of our agreed consulting period, I presented Brandon with a detailed assessment of his business, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and specific recommendations for improvement. Based on what I've observed, I concluded, I'm prepared to recommend you for limited consulting support from our consortium. Specifically, I believe Harold Winters, our retired engineer, would be an excellent resource for your structural renovation projects. Brandon's face lit up with genuine gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Davidson, I won't let you down. See that you don't, I replied. Not just for my sake, but for your clients and ultimately for yourself. The reputation you build now will follow you for decades. As he left my office, I reflected on the strange circular journey that had brought us to this point, from being belittled by this young man to mentoring him, from losing everything to building something new and necessary, from shame to purpose. That evening, as we prepared for a small gathering celebrating the consortium's first year of operation, Elaine wrapped her arms around me from behind. You seem contemplative, she observed. Just thinking about the unexpected turns life takes. I turned to face her, still marveling at how the silver in her hair caught the light. If you'd told me 2 years ago that I'd be running a successful consulting business after working as a Super Save greeter, I would have thought you were delusional. And if you'd told me I'd be using my textile knowledge professionally at 65, I would have said the same, she replied with a smile. Sometimes the hardest chapters lead to the most satisfying resolutions. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of our first guests. As we welcomed Marta and other consortium members into our home, I was struck by the transformation in all of us. The defeated, humiliated seniors who had once endured daily indignities for survival wages had become confident professionals once again. Not by returning to our past roles, but by reimagining how our experience could serve in the present. The consortium continued to grow over the following years, expanding to include specialized divisions for different professional backgrounds. We developed mentorship programs pairing experienced seniors with young professionals seeking guidance. We created training modules on intergenerational workplace dynamics for corporate clients trying to bridge communication gaps between veteran employees and new hires. Brandon's contracting business thrived with the support of occasional consortium consultants. He never became a close friend, but he did become something equally valuable, a case study in how attitudes can evolve when exposed to the right influences. He hired several older craftsmen who had been pushed out of larger companies, recognizing the value of their experience rather than seeing only their gray hair and slower movements. 5 years after my last day at Super Save, I received a letter from their corporate headquarters. Concerned about high turnover rates among older employees, they were seeking consultation on creating a more age-inclusive workplace culture. The irony was delicious. Will you take the contract? Elaine asked when I showed her the letter. I considered it carefully. Yes, but not alone. I'll bring Marta and Harold. We'll make it a comprehensive assessment. Our eventual recommendations led to significant policy changes not just at the local Super Save, but across their regional operations. Flexible scheduling for seniors, mentorship roles that utilize their institutional knowledge, management training, specifically addressing age discrimination and unconscious bias. Sandra, still managing the store where I'd once greeted customers, implemented our recommendations with genuine commitment. When I visited 6 months later to assess progress, she proudly introduced me to their new experience ambassadors. older employees whose specific role was to share product knowledge and customer service expertise with younger staff. Your time here changed how I think about older workers, she admitted during our follow-up meeting. Watching someone with your background and abilities being underutilized, it made me question a lot of assumptions. Sometimes difficult experiences serve larger purposes, I replied, thinking of how my humiliation had ultimately led to meaningful change, not just for myself, but potentially for thousands of seniors in similar positions. As I approach 75, I'm gradually reducing my involvement in the day-to-day operations of the consortium. Younger seniors, those in their 60s, are taking leadership roles, bringing fresh energy while maintaining our core mission. Elaine and I travel more now, visiting our children and grandchildren, indulging in the retirement activities we once thought permanently beyond our reach. But I haven't fully stepped away. 3 mornings each week I still consult on restoration projects, my hands too arthritic now for craftsmanship, but my knowledge as sharp as ever. I still mentor young contractors, including Brandon, who recently won a preservation award for his sensitive restoration of a historic firehouse. Sometimes visiting project sites where I once would have been the master craftsman wielding tools, I feel a momentary pang for the physical work I can no longer do. But it passes quickly, replaced by satisfaction in the knowledge I can still impart, the standards I can still uphold, the legacy I continue to build. The hardest lesson of my later years, one I would never have chosen but am nevertheless grateful to have learned, is that dignity isn't a stable condition bestowed by professional status or financial security. It's a practice, a daily choice to recognize your own worth even when others fail to see it, to stand firm in the value of your experience even when market forces dismiss it, to find new expressions for your abilities when old pathways close. This morning, I received an email from a local community college asking if I would consider teaching a special course on traditional woodworking techniques. Your knowledge is irreplaceable, the department chair wrote, and we believe the integration of established craftsmanship with contemporary applications would be invaluable for our students. As I draft my affirmative response, I think of the circular journey that brought me here. From master craftsman to retail greeter to consultant to educator. From economic security to devastating loss to rebuilt stability. From assumed dignity to hard-won self-respect. I think of Brandon, who learned that authority without respect is ultimately empty. Of Marta, who transformed organizational skills honed over decades into a thriving consulting practice. Of Elaine, who found professional application for knowledge previously valued only within our home. And I recognize that perhaps the most valuable thing we've created isn't the consortium itself, but the model it represents. A refusal to accept obsolescence, a determination to create new channels for wisdom when traditional ones close, a community of mutual support that transforms individual vulnerability into collective strength. Red Super Save vest still hangs in the back of my closet. I keep it as a reminder, not of humiliation but of resilience, of the darkest professional chapter that unexpectedly led to one of the most meaningful, of the price of dignity, and the discovery that its true value lies not in how others perceive you but in how you perceive yourself. In the end, dignity isn't what you lose when circumstances force you into work others deem beneath you. It's what you reclaim when you refuse to let those circumstances define your worth. It's the recognition that experience, wisdom, and character remain valuable, even when the marketplace temporarily fails to price them accordingly. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson I can pass on to the generations that will someday find themselves where I once stood, at the intersection of age, necessity, and the enduring human need for meaningful contribution. Not just how to endure such moments, but how to transform them into foundations for unexpected new beginnings.